Kyle the Panda Man has a really unique story with his experience from, bodybuilding to the collegiate level with football to questioning a lot of the paradigm and utilizing some really interesting things to get great results for his clients. Really excited to be able to visit with Kyle and share a lot of what he's doing. It's really, really cool. Kyle, thanks for taking the time to visit with me, brother. My father-in-law is actually who told me about your Instagram page and started following along with what you were doing. And you were saying a lot of stuff that was a lot more nuanced than what I've heard, with more of kind of your older school powerlifting kind of mentality. And so as you put out content and shared these success stories, I just wanted to visit with you and see how we can learn and apply and adapt. And so if you don't care, give us that little intro to what you did, highlight the football experience. I think that's super cool. And then how you got to questioning kind of the status quo.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Logan, for having me. Been looking forward to this. So where do I start, man? I got into lifting back in high school. So for me, really the year was 1998 when I got really into it. So I was in my junior year. We would lift for sports and all that. But then I fell in love with the lifting, right? To the point where I almost gave up all the sports. I only played basketball my senior year, which was my passion going into that time. But I got so involved in the weight room and just fall in love with it. Ordering books, this is before the internet was a huge thing, right? And you didn't have phones, so mail order books, read them, really studying at a young age. So from way back then, man, I was doing full body training, right? I was basing what I was doing on this one book that I got, and based on how the Bulgarians would train. So it was really learning about the stress adaptation to the body, which how many high schoolers are really studying that, right? So I would spend literally hours in the gym, and it was, for me, it was really about confidence, building my confidence. I was very introverted, but I found peace in the gym, and, in my mind is, okay, I'll build myself up. Maybe that confidence will come. So I did that. And then I went to school, University of Delaware, for fitness management, which I didn't really have any idea what I was going to do with that. Didn't really learn. Obviously, it was more about the social interaction in college. I didn't really learn much as far as the exercise and fitness went. And coming out of that, I was like, all right, what am I going to do now? I had to do an internship. So I worked with Rutgers football, strength and conditioning here in New Jersey. I applied. The guy happened to graduate from my high school. He's about, I think Jay's 12 years older than me. And he said, yeah, come on in. So it was an unpaid internship. And I worked like a dog for that whole summer. The hours were very intense, and Rutgers was kind of building at that point. They were just on the verge of breaking through. Before that, they were like a laughing stock. But I got to, Jay was very smart, really good coach. But at the time, he's in his early 30s. I'm 21. And so he treated me like an intern, right? Which is, I wouldn't have it any other way, man. I had to earn what I was doing, earn the respect of the team. I'm basically the same age as the players, a lot of the players at that point. So did that, didn't know at the end of the summer, I was like, maybe I don't want to do this right now, as far as being a collegiate strength coach. So I went back to school right out after the summer for health and phys ed here in New Jersey. I just did, some correspondence learning while I was working, and got a job doing that, right? So I was a phys ed teacher, and starting in 2006. But I knew there was something else, right? I had some certain health issues going on at the time, and I got really depressed. I was competing in natural bodybuilding, took a couple of years off, and finally that year, 06, 07, I said, man, I got to compete again, because I was so depressed. There was nothing going on. And it was in the course of getting ready for the contest, I really dove into self-development and reading Tony Robbins, one of his books, Awaken the Giant Within. Everything kind of clicked in my head, but then I realized, okay, I got to start a business. I had a landscaping business as a kid, about 10 years old, 10 to 13, which I loved. So I had this idea, okay, it's either going to be landscaping or personal training, because at the gym, everybody would come up to me and ask me questions. I was doing things in a much different way at that point. Nobody was training the way I was training. obviously I really dialed in nutrition as far as learning about all the micronutrients and macronutrients. At that point, I had the nutrition almanac, and I would track everything by hand, weigh everything, write everything down in a notebook. So I really got to learn it in depth. Obviously, I went with the personal training route at that time, and that evolved into having a couple gyms and now the online presence and coaching. Though, when I resigned from teaching, that was a very hard decision. I was a K to 4 phys ed teacher, and I loved the kids and I loved what I was doing, but I was doing the gym and that. And it got to the point where my body was physically just kind of breaking down, really bad, horrific knee injury, had pneumonia. And finally my wife was like, "Oh, you gotta make a decision." But I realized that the teaching and coaching are the same thing. And I would still just be coaching people, just a different age level, maybe my adults, collegiate athletes, high school athletes. And now, I don't coach that many people at my gyms anymore. Got people all over the world online that I help, and I coach my boys. My boys are playing soccer, they're playing football, and the impact. I'm sure you probably played sports growing up, right? And if you think back at the time as a kid, you don't really realize, man, that these guys are volunteering. Their dads, a lot of them, and I see a lack of fathers that want to volunteer and really be involved at that level. So I jump at the opportunity, but then I also realize I'm very conscious of, okay, it's still coaching these young boys to learn discipline, to learn perseverance, things of that nature. Not as much about the X's and O's. Obviously you want to execute. So I just love coaching, man. That's kind of where I wound up. And the funny thing about JB, who I was talking about from Rutgers, when Coach Shiano left for the Bucks back in like 2007, Jay went with him down there. When Coach Shiano, so I'm not sure how familiar you are, he came back. Rutgers rehired him about, I think, 4.5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And his first hire back was JB. So it's cool. It's come full circle. Now we're good buddies. We train together, when he has time, which is tough during the season, but it's really cool. He'll take ideas that I'm doing, implement them over there with the players, and he gives me ideas that we can implement with my clients. It's really cool, man. So that's kind of the long story. Cool.
No, I love it. I love it. No, I think one of my favorite moments was Rutgers. I believe it was Jeremy Ito, where he kicked a field goal, turned around and pointed up at the camera. It was like this perfect moment.
Yeah. Familiar. Yeah.
So absolutely. I love college football. So
yeah, me too.
Kyle, with that, let's dive into a little bit on something that is extremely important as a tool, and that's fasting. And so I come from a lens of cancer, and fasting, in my opinion, is absolutely crucial. More of your long form fasting as a tool of utilizing the overcoming cancer. But you've been able to also use and coach and teach with it for even athletics. And I think that for a lot of people, that almost sounds counterintuitive. Like, if we're going to be training and we're building and all this, why in the world would we fast? So how did you get interested in fasting? And then how do you apply some of this to overcome some of those misconceptions?
Sure. Great question. So I got into it. So my last time I competed in bodybuilding was 2014, to kind of put that knee injury I told you about, the first knee injury, behind me. I said, all right, let me make sure I can regain full use of my leg. Let me get ready for a show. My wife had never seen me compete. So anyway, I'm always reading, always learning. So I was about 8 weeks out from that contest. And the way that was initially coached to me, which you realize, right, okay, you're just repeating dogma. Then I would teach my clients controlling calories, all this stuff. So I would have to, basically, because of what I call metabolic damage, I would have to diet at 1,400, 1,500 calories a day to get ripped for a show, which for a guy my size is miserable. And it was just tough, man. It was tough. And I'm about 8 weeks out from the show. I think at that point I was doing 1,600 calories, 4 meals, and I'm reading about stubborn fat. And this guy used to study a lot of really good information. He was saying, look, you got your stubborn fat for men typically is your lower abdomen, your love handles, that type of area. What makes it stubborn is a different type of receptor, fat cell receptor. And it has a very poor blood supply. And really the only way you can increase blood flow to that area, which is step one in fat loss, is fasting. And I said, man, I'd heard of fasting before, but I believed all the misconceptions. I can't do that. I'm a bodybuilder. I'm going to lose muscle, blah, blah, blah. But something clicked in my head. And the next day I went to your typical intermittent fasting. I took the same amount of food because I was measuring everything. And I went from 4 meals to 2 meals. And instantly I was like, this is much easier. The hunger is much more tolerable. So I knew I was on to something, right? So I started practicing it, and I realized after the show, I'd usually blow up like a tick. I was able to maintain my shape for the rest of that summer, which was, 6 weeks or so. So again, I'm like, okay, I'm on to something here. I remember going for a walk with my wife and being really excited about it. So I did that for the next, 16 to 18 hour fast, typically every day for the next 5 years. But it still something wasn't right. Right. So in 2019, we were having a fat loss contest at the gym. Me and my staff were doing it. The clients do their own, and I was going up against a lot of these younger trainers, and I said, all right, there's got to be something. Because my wife, Devin, she would tell me periodically, not in a mean way, but she said, I don't understand the way you eat, you track everything, you're doing intermittent fasting, you're training all the time, that you would look a little different. And it was the truth, though, because I'd be frustrated. I'm like, why can I not get lean unless I'm doing like 1,500 calories? So I dove into long-form fasting research. Long form, okay, for me, that's 48 and beyond. And I started doing it. That whole first summer of 2019, I did a 72-hour fast, and I would just kind of see what happened. And I started at 249, 16.5% body fat, and I went down to 225 and 6.5% body fat within the course of that summer. That was the variable that changed. Today, I was just like, all right, this is it, and everything I do, I look at a habit, the way I coach people and the way I work myself. If I can't form a habit around it, I'm conscious of that going in, that, hey, this might be a temporary thing, like a 75 hard program, but I always want to settle on a habit. So at the end of the summer, I said, all right, I'm not going to do a 72-hour fast the rest of my life every week. Use it periodically. But a 48, I can do that. So the past 5.5 years now, I've been doing, on average, slightly less than 6 meals a week. I don't know anybody else that's been doing it that long. I'm sure there are people, but I've coached a lot of people on it, right? So then people will come at me and say, where's the science? I'm like, the science follows the truth. Do this, and then you'll know the truth. You'll know what works. So that's kind of how I came to it. And then what I realized is performance will improve. And people say, how does that happen? Well, unless you're doing ultra endurance races, for the most part, you're going to see performance go up, right? The oxygenation, I find, of the blood is much better. Well, how do I know that? Well, I've read some old time books that correspond to what I was experimenting with, which when I do my breath work, when I'm in a longer part of a fast, guess what? I can hold my breath much longer. Okay. The cold tub is much more tolerable when I'm in a longer part of a fast. So all this self-experimentation, I just started kind of just keeping track of everything and realizing, okay, man, I can actually perform and go much better. So it's a huge misconception that people need food to perform at that moment. Right. It's an after effect. You have plenty of glycogen, within the muscles, carbohydrate and water when they combine to fuel you for pretty much any activity that somebody's going to do. So the blood flow is key, really keeping you in that primal state. I believe that's a big thing with the fasting, where you feel some hunger periodically. Right. I think it kind of tie that into the hunter gatherer. Right. If you're going to be an athlete, that's hunting. You got to be out. You got to be putting in that primal effort. Combine that with your fasting. So to me, that's something different that I teach and any really other fasting people. There's a few, but a lot of fasting people say, well, you fast, you should rest. I'm like, no, this is what you got to push it in that fasted state. This is when you have to push yourself. So yeah, I've used it with a lot of athletes. If I ever competed in bodybuilding again, that's exactly what I would do. I would follow exactly what I'm doing. It would be much easier. It would be so much easier, because essentially now I've maintained single digit body fat. That's the only thing that's changed, right? And it's just so simple. And you got to just do it consistently. The compounding effect of the hormones over time is where the magic happens.
Recently, Dr. John Jaquish was on, and we went into a lot of, his theories and takes, and I think it pretty much parallels perfectly what you've said. And I think, John's been doing OMAD for literally years, right? So yeah. 1 meal a day for those that don't know. And so, and he's really a huge fan of carnivore, like very much carnivore, and then the fasting and then resistance training. But one thing that he started putting out was dry fasting. And so like on the surface, that's terrifying, right? But as I look into it, all of these modalities that you've talked about with the cold therapy or the intermittent fasting, it's really just kind of a way of boosting the mitochondria. And I think a lot of people don't realize that the mitochondria actually produce water. That's one of the byproducts, or quote unquote byproducts. So with the dry fasting, how do you start that education process? How have you been able to get comfortable with that and overcome that? Hey, everybody thinks that we're already hydrated or dehydrated. That just sounds crazy. So what's your thoughts on dry fasting?
So dry fasting is great. It's the next level. It's that first summer I was telling you about. I dabbled with doing 48-hour dry fast and whatnot. But mentally, it was a struggle, right? It was like kind of forcing myself, but I wanted to experiment. And then last summer, fall, I was essentially doing a 48, 72-hour dry fast for successive weeks. I do that for a couple months. And mentally, much easier, right? So so as far as the mechanics of it, in some ways, it's much easier because what I find is when people drink, sometimes the hunger hormones or the hunger pangs get kicked up, for lack of a better term. Once they get over the mental barrier of I'm not taking anything in and realizing facts, like I try to teach people, obviously, before I have them do a dry fast, I don't start people with that, is your body can produce a liter of water on its own each day. Most people aren't aware of that. Where does the water come from? The hydrogen, I should say, comes from the fat cell, right? To create this water with the mitochondria. So fat loss is accelerated. Stem cell production is accelerated. Autophagy, and basically stuff I've read, is basically 3 times more potent than a water fast. So extremely powerful. If you want I don't care what it is, any medical condition. You talked about cancer. When I get this question when I do seminars, what would you do if you got cancer? I would dry fast the heck out of it as much as I could tolerate. When I was drinking, I would be drinking a lot of baking soda within my water, pumping vitamin C, doing urine therapy, and then I'd repeat. And that's what I would do, right, to kick it. So it's very powerful, but I like people to start with water fasting, and then with the dry or even the water, I use something called incremental fasting, where it's like take 12 hours at a time. If this is new for you, don't look too far ahead, right? The brain doesn't like that. 12 hours, make it to that point, decide if you can go another 12 hours if you want to. And that's the way you can really build into this. But dry fasting, a great book on that is the Phoenix Protocol. I think he's got a 7-day protocol, that guy, and it's really cool. Now, I stopped doing it. Probably the last time I did one was at least 6 months ago. And the only reason it wasn't even that long ago. It's a couple months ago. Since I'm a teenager, I have, basically stage 3 kidney disease. So I can feel it in the kidneys, right? But it's also very cleansing for the kidneys. And to note on that too, my kidney condition has not regressed at all in the past 5 years. So my nephrologist says that's probably from all the fasting you're doing. So that's some cool data too. It hasn't gone down at all. Actually just came up 10 points. But that's why I took a break from the dry fasting, just because I was getting back into it and said, okay, maybe I'll do more research. But from what I read, it is actually very healthy for the kidneys. I just don't know anybody with, kidney disease that's done it. But I'll come back to it and experiment more. That I'm doing regular blood work for that.
Yeah. Well, and keep me posted on that. So my son was diagnosed stage 4 kidney cancer, right? So he had one of his kidneys removed. And so understanding the kidney is a big part of, like, I want to take care of that one kidney that he's got, right? And so I'm curious as to how big of an effect the regular utilization of baking soda is for you. I think that's a massive buffer for a lot of what you got going on. But so Kyle, when you use the dry fasting with clients, what do you notice with them? What are the biggest benefits of doing that? And then also, let's find out any things that they're just really not tolerable.
Biggest benefit, I would say, to why people are interested in what they'll notice first, just because it's how most people think, is the fat loss, right? The accelerated, if they look at it as weight loss or fat loss, really concerned about fat loss. So I would say that is the biggest benefit. I have had people do it, and even with water fasting, but it's accelerated with the dry, with, let's say, joint pain. I have one guy that is, couldn't turn his neck either way for years, man. He starts going through the protocol, starting introducing dry fasting. Now he's got, full range of motion there. So anecdotal, whatever, but I've seen skin conditions clear up, eczema, psoriasis from that. And What was the other part of the question?
Just what was not tolerable? What are people having a really, really hard time with?
With the dry?
Yeah.
I think it's the lack of fasting is really a mental game, right? And I would say it's a great self-development tool. So if you're doing a water fast and you can say, oh man, well, I want something. All right, I can go have, I call it the juice, right? The salts in the water. I can go have that or a coffee. When you take that away, now it's another level, right? So it's really that inner game. I think that the biggest thing that's not tolerable, again, if you're not emotionally mature enough for the dry, right? And that's why I think it's good to start people on water and then get to the dry. Already with the water fasting, you're going to get what I call the demons. They're going to attack you. And what is that, right? It's actual literal demons. I believe that, this is biblical, man. The fasting is a biblical principle mentioned multiple times in the Bible. God tells us when you fast and when you pray, not if. But the devil doesn't want you fasting. It's a very powerful weapon. Jesus fasted 40 days in the desert, right? And how was he tempted? With food, with bread from the devil. But I believe when you start getting this clarity and you start getting this spiritual benefit of fasting, you're going to be attacked by these doubts. Maybe I shouldn't do this. It might come in the form of a friend, a family member, but they're going to attack, right? So that's really where the battle's at. I look at it on that level. The physiological stuff is really, really good. But I think that's what you're going to have. Can you overcome the demons up here when you start doing this?
Fascinating. So, Kyle, what about some of the other what would be quote unquote woo woo stuff? What about grounding and being in the sun and the blue light toxicity? I think that that's a lot of things that we haven't taken the step on. Maybe in coming from that original world we talked
Yeah.
about, that powerlifting, bodybuilding. So where have you come along the lines of those topics?
I think they're fantastic. I think they're great, and it is easy to overlook them. I tell people with my cold tub, and I made one out of a box freezer. It's in the back of the house. It's like a love-hate relationship. I do not like getting in, man. It's a battle every morning, man. I stand there, do my video on it, show people. And then I get in, but you feel great afterwards. And I noticed even as far as not just how you feel, there's something about getting leaner with taking consistent cold tubs. But as far as I believe it's along the lines of Wim Hof, it's a primal thing. We're supposed to be exposed to that. I believe with, grounding, being in nature. I'm really big in being outside, being in the woods, walking. When you can walk barefoot, it's great. When you look at, the Russian athletes, I remember hearing this a long time ago when they were getting overtrained, let's say in the 1970s, maybe even the 60s, before all these fancy gizmos to measure the nervous system activation. Okay, they know their numbers are going down, performance is going down. They're probably pushing it. Those people are training 4, 5, 6 times a day. They would take them to the beach. Hey, shoes off. We'll pick you up here in 6 hours. Just walk up and down the beach. Right. So the feeling of the sand, being near the ocean, something about being near water too is very, very powerful. So not kind of separate from the cold water therapy, just being near bodies of water, I think is very, very, it's a different energy. So I think all this stuff is really powerful and you got to embrace it. Right. And this is not something that modern mainstream fitness or medical teaches, because I believe there's a conspiracy to keep people unhealthy. So I think it's all super powerful, man. I think it's really, next level stuff, the simple stuff, and it's right there in front of you. Most of it's free.
And most of it's free. I think you're spot on with every bit of that. Tom Seeger was on. He's the one that came up with the Maraska ice baths, and so he laid out. And I finally started doing it. I hate being cold. I'm here in Arkansas, and we have plenty of seasons. Right, we have like 18 seasons in one year with all the extreme changes. But I just don't like the cold, and so finally do it. Get in there, and it's a big deal. I hate it too. I agree with you. But when you
Yeah.
finally do it and you have that dopamine rush afterwards and all of the physiologically positive benefits, it's fascinating. So it's something that we do now, and I really wish it was something I would have understood better. I think it's another tool for cancer as well. So what's what is next for you? What are you working on? What's the next plans, and how do you continue to learn?
Man, good question. So what's next for me? I told you I have the two gyms here. Me and my wife, we met when we were teaching. We both, I resigned in 2012 and she resigned a couple years later with our second child. But now with what I'm doing online and realizing, so we've kind of looked at my career in phases. Me and my wife will talk about it. And we knew a couple of years ago that, okay, it's time to take the message to a bigger audience. To pull on that trigger, we're really focusing. Like, to me, social media is a necessary evil. I don't really consume it. I like learning on YouTube, but you ain't going to find me scrolling or anything. Very, very rare that I do that. Unless there's somebody specific I want to look up. So, and I'm not a phone guy. Like, my ringer is never on. It's always upside down. It's hard to get in touch with me unless I have like a scheduled appointment. So to me, it was like, okay, I knew I had to embrace this to get the message out. And that's really kind of taken off. And I've always been passionate about creating, right? Writing, making the videos. I've been doing YouTube since I think 2011. I started my channel, and it was just something I knew that was important. And again, I'm introverted. I don't really like to, but I've become pretty good at speaking. I practice it a lot, right? I've had a lot of training on it. So the next realm, we're having baby number 4 in January. So that's pretty cool. You know,
Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, it's pretty neat. We were going back and forth on, okay, do we do this? I'm 43 now. And we said, oh, last Christmas, let's go for it and see what happens. It happened. So, you know, we got that coming. Going back to the gym stuff, I'm trying to simplify. We have another business too. We have a senior home, but you know, the principle of focus. So I'm trying to potentially, downgrade and get rid of one of the gyms, pass it off to somebody that can really take care of it. You know, I care about the clients, but and I'm not that involved there, but it's just a headspace, right? To really keep dialing on this path that I'm going on. And then it will probably be the next gym. And, that's in the immediate. Now, how do I keep learning, man? I'm always, you know, got books. I'm always reading. Every time I'm driving, I call it the University on Wheels. I'm listening to something to learn, whether that's about something I'm interested in physical wise. A lot of it's mindset. A lot of it, I love studying the stuff going around with the craziness of the world. You know, I'm big into that stuff, conspiracies, for lack of a better term. I love studying that stuff. Always have questioned reality and the message we've been told. But to me, it's like, okay, I'm learning, and I share that with people, right? And I share people, and I love having conversations. I have my own coaches. I've had one guy that's been coaching me since 2012, and that's crazy to stay with the coach that long, but he's always learning. You know, he's always got his own coaches. So and we become good buddies, but he's always upgrading his knowledge. And then I have another coach, my second go around with that I invest a good amount of money into. And, we have calls every other week. And so I really believe in the coaching, always studying courses. So it's kind of that, like that is my passion, really, is learning. But then it's in a selfish way, but the greatest way for me to learn is to teach, you know. Yeah. So I think that's how God kind of uses me.
Yeah. I love that. So it is a really big weight to juggle, right? Do it in your own geography, right? Or have a bigger impact, because the social media space is terrifying, because some of that information, most of that information out there is absolutely damaging,
Yes.
and it's being parroted. It's not proof of work, right? Like the people that are saying it have no experience in XYZ, but they're simply parroting what they've heard from maybe a combination of a few others. So the genuine experience is massive, being shared, and that's a big deal. So I'm excited that you're trying to kind of revamp and focus on that. I love what you're putting out, brother. I think we're very aligned on absolutely the vast majority of it. And so anything we can do to help, happy to do so, brother. I know you've got some football practice to get caught up to. And man, I really appreciate you taking the time, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. If people want to message me, I try to get back to everybody, or they can go to the website, thepandamanofficial.com, and that's going to be a new website coming up. So appreciate you having me on and having the opportunity to speak to your audience.
I love it, brother. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you for joining us in the Sowing Prosperity mission. If you like this content, like and subscribe, share with your friends. Be sure to check out sowingprosperity.com. Sign up for the email. We've got so much more work to do.